welcome to Shazzy Reads. I'm Shaz. Today we are going to be doing my wrap up for the month of June. June was a pretty full month for me. I think I read a lot more in June than I have for the rest of the year so far. And most of what I read was really good, so I'm excited to talk about it with you all today. There were two books that aren't going to be included in this wrap up that I did read in June just because I included them in my May wrap up because I had finished them early in the month. And those books were Killers of a Certain Age and A House with Good Bones. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Here Be Leviathans by Chris Flynn. This is a short story collection by an Australian author. All of the stories are told either from the perspective of an inanimate object or from the perspective of an animal. So this is definitely like an experimental short story collection which I quite enjoyed. I remember doing these kind of like writing exercises when I was in uni, so it was kind of fun to just see a short story collection that kind of felt like a collection of writing exercises, and I enjoyed like that experimental feel of it. My favourite short story in this collection was called 22E, and this story is told from the perspective of an airplane seat as it goes on its last journey. So definitely a trigger warning for that story. Do not read it at an airport, or even if you've got like a flight booked in the near future, because it's quite triggering in that aspect. I'm glad I wasn't about to go on a plane when I was reading it. But it was just like a really interesting story, a really interesting concept, and the comedy was really fun in it. And that goes through all the stories in this. I do think that it's quite funny, but I'd still only rated it 3 stars. Not all of the stories were a hit for me, and I don't think it's going to really stick with me all that well, aside from maybe that one chapter. But yeah, it was a fun time. If you're looking for a short story collection that's a bit weird, or if you want to read more from Australian authors, I would recommend it. The next book I read was a junior fiction, and that was Aru Shah and the End of Time by Roshani Chokshi. So this is a junior fiction that takes a lot of inspiration from Hindu mythology, which is really interesting. I'm always interested in mythology-based stories, particularly ones that allow me to learn more about different mythologies, because that's something that's always interested me. So I really enjoyed how this book explored that and how it like used different stories from Hindu mythology as part of the plot. So in this book we follow Aru Shah. She is a girl that lives in a museum with her mum. The museum collects like Hindu artifacts and whatnot. And one day she's confronted by her classmates in the museum and they call her a liar. And to prove them wrong, she lights this lamp which is meant to cause destruction. And little does she know, this lamp does what it says on the tin, and it awakens this creature called the Sleeper. The Sleeper will walk the earth, I think it's for 10 days, and everywhere it goes, people will freeze. And Aru Shah finds out that she is one of the reincarnations of one of the Pandava brothers, who are these heroic brothers in Hindu mythology. And she is tasked with stopping the Sleeper and saving the world, along with a god who has taken the form of a pigeon and one of the other Pandava siblings. I really enjoyed this. Again, I think that the way that it interwove Hindu mythology into the plot was really good, and it was really funny. There were a lot of funny one-liners and stuff that made me cackle, and I thought that the characters were really charming and flawed and excellent. The pacing was also excellent. I do think it dragged on a bit too long for the end, and I also think that some of the references do make the book feel dated, particularly the HP and Divergent references. But overall, I did have a really good time with this, and I end up rating this a 4 stars because I just had so much fun with it. I'm currently reading the second book, so that will be included in my July wrap-up, and I'm really excited to see how the story goes. The next book I read was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Rebecca is a Gothic classic. I wanted to read this for a few years. I remember it was talked about in one of my uni classes and it sounded really interesting. This book follows an unnamed narrator, and this narrator is a young woman who is a companion to this rich older woman. So she like goes around with her and whatnot and provides her company. And while on one of these trips, she meets this rich older man and they end up in this whirlwind romance. And at the end of the trip, he asks her to marry him. And so they go back to his estate, which is like famous for being so super beautiful. And at this estate, the protagonist cannot seem to escape Rebecca, who is the first wife of Mr. De Winter. Rebecca seems to be everywhere. The housekeeper adored Rebecca, and she does not like this new woman. And when the protagonist cannot help but compare herself to this woman who she never actually knew. Rebecca had died a few months prior to the start of the story, and her presence really fills the estate. So I thought this was a bit slow at the beginning. Like, the writing was gorgeous, but it was a bit overly descriptive for me personally. But once I hit that second half and like the plot started to move, I got really into it. I was super absorbed into the writing and the setting and the story, and I was just wanting to know what happened next. I know a lot of people were frustrated by the main character. I thought she was actually pretty interesting because she kept on comparing herself to this woman, and she kept on having like vivid imaginations of like people gossiping about her, and then comparing her to Rebecca. And I just thought that was like a really interesting trait for a protagonist to have. So I actually thought she was quite interesting, and I was surprised that all people found her annoying. I guess she is a bit of a doormat, but I honestly found that aspect of her personality pretty interesting. I'm glad like I finally read it. I can fully understand why this is such a beloved classic. I ended up rating it 4 stars. If you're looking for a classic to read, I can't recommend it enough. The next book I read was a reread, and this book doesn't have a cover, but it was By the Pricking of My Thumbs by Agatha Christie. So this is a Tommy and Tuppence novel. So if you're not familiar with Tommy and Tuppence, they are this couple. I believe that they started off as like private investigators, and then they were spies, and now they're retired. So this book kind of looks at that. In this book, they go to this nursing home to visit Tommy's aunt, and there Tuppence meets this older woman who says something about a baby and a fireplace, and she's like, what the hell? And then the next time they go there, the woman has disappeared, and Tuppence is really worried about her. And this woman had this painting of this old house that Tuppence for some reason remembers, so she goes about and investigates. So this is definitely a meandering story. The only thing I remembered about it before starting to reread it was the ending, and the ending is truly insane. So while I was rereading it, all I was waiting for was to get to the ending, because that was the bit that I remembered. I do think that the rest of the plot, it meanders a lot, and it does get quite boring at points, but I do think that the ending is kind of worth it. I'm like this is the book that I want to see people reacting, just because the ending is so insane and so unexpected. But like, other than the ending, I don't think it has a whole lot to offer. Definitely not one of my favorites. I think the first time I read this, I did rate it like a 4 stars, mostly because that ending took me by surprise so much, and I forgot how meandering the book is in the beginning. On rereading it, I did lower my rating to 2.75 stars. I still think it's probably worth a read if you're an Agatha Christie fan, but be warned that it does meander a lot. The next book was another reread, and that was Break by Hannah Moshkowitz. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I read this when I was a teenager, and I loved it. So I was curious about rereading it just to see whether I still liked it, whether I still wanted it on my bookshelf. And this book is about a high school boy who is breaking his bones one by one. His whole idea is that when he breaks the bones, it will grow back stronger. So that's his whole thing. And he has a young brother who's allergic to everything, and a newborn baby brother who is causing the other younger brother to get sick. So the main character is under a lot of stress, and his parents are always arguing. Upon rereading it, I could see why this book appealed to me so much. There's a lot of swearing, there's a lot of self-destruction, and I think as a teenager, I was really drawn to those things. Because like, I was going through some mental health issues myself at the time, and I can see why this book appealed to me. But as an adult, it did not appeal to me at all. I found that I was pretty bored by the plot. I found that it got really confusing in the middle, and the way that the story ended did not leave any room for closure. I also don't think that this has like a good representation of a psych ward. I'm not sure what the standards are for psych ward representation, but I was made uncomfortable by the way it was portrayed in this book. I'm glad I reread it because it allowed me to see what kind of books did appeal to me when I was a teenager, but I won't be reading it again. I will be taking it to a secondhand shop. Ended up rating it 2 stars this time around. The next book was 5 Red Herrings by Dorothy L. Sayers. This is a Lord Peter Wimsey story. So if you're not familiar with Dorothy L. Sayers, she's one of Agatha Christie's contemporaries. Her writing style is very different from Agatha Christie's. Her books don't tend to be as much of a huge dunnet, and her books have a lot more continuity than Agatha Christie books do. This one is more of a whodunit than I'm used to from Sayers, and I think that's why I enjoyed this one more than I've enjoyed most of her books so far. This one, it takes place in like this village where everyone is either an artist or a fisher or both, and this man who is hated by most of the people in the town dies, and it seems like it's an accident, like he just fell into this river, but Peter Wimsey notices that something is missing from the scene of the crime. So there are 6 main suspects in this story. All of them have a motive, none of them have a valid alibi, and there are 5 red herrings like the title says. So I really enjoy this one. I always enjoy a good whodunit story, and this one definitely appealed to me in that regard. And yeah, I didn't guess like who had done it. My theory changed several times throughout the book, and like once it was revealed, I could easily see the clues that I had missed. And yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of this. I usually find, like, with Sayers books, I'm usually able to guess who done it fairly quickly. But in this one, I wasn't, and I enjoyed that aspect because that's what I enjoy about whodunit stories. I can easily see, like, the high amount of red herrings, like, annoying people, but for me, that's part of what I enjoyed about it. One thing I will say about the book is that the accents were, like, written out. A lot of the characters are Scottish, and their accents written out, and it makes it very annoying to read at times. Sometimes Sayers, like, does poke fun at it, and there are some humorous scenes that come from this. But I found it pretty irritating, and just be warned, like, if you don't like that kind of thing, you might be better off skipping this one. But yeah, I really enjoyed it overall. I ended up rating it 4.5 stars. It was just a really good whodunit story for me. So the next book that I finished was Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Sutanto. This book, we are following Vera, who is this older woman who owns this tea shop. One morning, she wakes up and she finds a dead body in her tea shop. And she decides that, like, the police are useless, so she decides to investigate on her own. I thought this was hilarious. I laughed out loud several times during this. It was really funny, really witty, really easy to read and get through. I got attached to the characters really quickly. I loved Vera. I hope we get a continuation of this just to see more of her. I don't think the whodunit aspect was very strong in this. In this book, I'm not sure how it's marketed in the US, but, like, down here it says whodunit. I was expecting, you know, a whodunit. It is kind of that there are, like, suspects laid out, but because we have access to those suspects' heads, we know that it's unlikely that any of them actually did it unless the author was going to go and make one of them an unreliable narrator, and I just didn't get that vibe. So I had to look at the characters who weren't a suspect, and once you look at the characters who aren't one of Vera's suspects, it becomes rather easy to guess, like, who it is. There are only two other characters whose thoughts we do not get access to, and it wasn't hard to narrow down which one of them was the likely culprit. That being said, I didn't guess the motive, and once the motive was revealed, I was able to easily, like, remember scenes that hinted towards the motive, and I really liked that aspect of it. I think that giving us the perspectives of the suspects was a bit of a mistake because it kind of gave the game away too early. But I still had a lot of fun with this one, and I ended up rating it a 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely recommend it if you want, like, a comedy, mystery, cozy mystery type thing. It was very fun to read, very easy to read, and I'd highly recommend it. Finally, I read Ellen Outside the Lines by A.J. Sass. This is a junior fiction following a Jewish girl with autism. So she has had this best friend her whole life. They've felt like an inseparable pair, but they've started to drift a bit, and Ellen is hoping that the upcoming school trip to Spain will allow them to return to normal. But she meets Isa, who is non-binary, and that leads to Ellen to start to question some things about herself a bit. I enjoyed this book. It was super easy to read. I did find Ellen to be quite a frustrating character. Because this is a junior fiction, it's understandable why Ellen makes the decisions that she does. She is a kid. I really understood her actions, but she makes a lot of bad decisions, and it was super frustrating to see her make those bad decisions, and I just wanted to, like, tell her not to make those decisions. So, like, while I understood it, I was a kid once too. I made similar decisions, but I just found that aspect really frustrating. That being said, it's always great to see, like, a junior fiction with, like, Jewish representation and non-binary representation and autism representation. I really enjoyed that aspect. There is also a kid with ADHD. I honestly wish we had seen more of that kid. He doesn't seem to get as much focus as the other kids, which was disappointing for me. But overall, I thought this was a solid junior fiction book. Autism is such a spectrum, but I do think for kids that have similar autism traits to Ellen, they would really like this book and relate to her heavily. And as an adult, I could clearly see, like, why a kid would like this. It's just that I had those frustrations with it, and I ended up rating it 3.25 stars. So that was my month of June. I was pretty happy that I was able to, like, read some books by non-white authors this month because I wasn't able to do that last month. So I'm happy about that. Definitely think I could improve and read even more books by non-white authors. So that is something that I will strive to do in the coming months. Hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe. Whatever you want to do. Hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you next time.